Hello and welcome to the Monopath podcast. I'm speaking with Ele Romana today, the primary baker from Cutthroat Confections. And despite this being a conversation with a baker, we didn't spend all that much time speaking about cooking or bakery or doing anything in the kitchen. Although we did give it a cursory glance here and there and acknowledge the wayward nature of the conversation as it unfolded. What we did speak about were the appropriate age to pick up a new skill. Quite a bit about social media and the way to conceptualize that. And I introduced a few philosophical terms I kind of muddied my way through in the conversation, so it might just be worth me reiterating those terms earlier on and preempting the conversation with that for your own benefit. So those two terms were to do with universals and particulars. They use these terms in philosophy to describe either one of two features or properties of a thing. So I stumbled my way through this description in the podcast, but a universal is something like the colour of an object. So redness is the example I gave, and that's the example that's often given in philosophical literature. The redness of a rose and the redness of anything else, an apple, let's say. That's a common property of those two things, and that's called a universal. Particular, on the other hand, is a little more individualistic, so it has something to do with whatever is inherent to that particular object. So the rose that you have in your hand being different from the roses that you didn't pick. Hopefully these terms make sense as the conversation comes into fruition. We were mostly speaking about aesthetics and beauty and value judgments at that point, and the degree with which the art or something created can identify with the creator or the artist, which is one of those topics that keeps coming back. The last thing is I can finally say something about the charity involvement that I've been working towards. So I've been looking at different charities that I could possibly involve myself with. I guess it's more of an entanglement, really. I intend to really just keep mentioning the work that they do, including the organisation and ways that you can donate to them in the YouTube descriptions and perhaps on the website some way. I'm going to start doing some work for the Brain and Behaviour Foundation. I'll put links to that in the description for this podcast, no doubt. They are an organisation who support scientists and research, particularly in the early stages of that research, towards developing treatment and even cures for cognitive disorders, so things like Alzheimer's and dementia, addiction, autism, depression, anxiety, these being all things that are personally relevant to me. So these just seemed like the perfect fit for me, really. As ever, there's no advertising on this podcast. I don't really like the format that encourages advertising in the typical way. It's quite interruptive. I don't really feel like that nurtures good conversation, so I'll be steering clear of that for the time being until perhaps I change my mind. I'm not sure. If you do want to support the podcast, though, if you've gained some value from listening to this or anything about it, simply sharing it with friends, subscribing to the YouTube channel, or on whichever podcast medium you happen to use, is actually quite helpful, more helpful than you would probably imagine. Even small gestures like liking posts on social media, these things do have a tremendous impact, not only on me, to know that people are out there and listening, and I'm not just in a small echo chamber with a population of 1, but as a signal to other people that that is not the case. Anyway, let's get into it. Without further ado, I bring you Ele Romana. Go.
Hello.
Elle?
Hello. Yes, hello.
Welcome to the podcast.
Why, thank you. It's delightful to be here in Ele's room.
Good.
Yes.
This morning, I watched your YouTube video. So it was on Death Metal Chef, and I know we were just talking about this off air. And you're quite embarrassed about it, but I thought it was brilliant. I loved it.
I've never watched one, so thank you very much. But I don't watch them. I can't.
That's okay.
I'll let you do that.
Could you maybe tell listeners what you do on YouTube?
So it just basically started off as being like a bit of a what shall we do during lockdown kind of project. My husband is a head chef and he's very good at what he does. He likes to cook food and he makes lots of nice things at home and in restaurants, I presume. So he decided he wanted to help people learn how to cook during lockdown, from like ingredients that you might have in your store cupboard or things that, you could get hold of when lockdown first started and a lot of ingredients were hard to find. And then off the backbone of that, I got involved because I do a lot of baking. We tend to bake everything from scratch at home. So off the backbone of that, I helped out and started doing some baking videos. So yeah, and did I think my first one was a Diplomatico. So yeah, it was fun.
I think it was.
I believe so. Yeah. Yes.
And so that's under the name Cutthroat Confectionery. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Cutthroat Confections. I think I can't remember now.
Where did the so the YouTube page for that is Death Metal Chef as well. So this is kind of giving you an indication of what sort of vein this is all being framed in.
Yeah, I mean, we might be slight metalheads, maybe. Yeah, we like metal and a little bit alternative lifestyle, perhaps. But nice people still.
Yeah.
Nice people. Yeah.
Yeah. People into death metal have feelings too.
Very, very deep feelings, quite growly, guttural feelings, I believe, yes. But we do have feelings.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the profundity out of the way nice and early on in the podcast.
Yeah, I think we're done with that now, to be honest with you. I think that bit's over.
Good.
Yeah.
So where did the name come from? I suppose with Jez, I could ask him that question another day. Maybe I'll get him on the podcast too. But for you, Cutthroat, sounds very piratey.
To be honest with you, he just said, if you were going to open a baking business, what would you call it? And that was just the first thing that cropped to my head. It just made me giggle. And I was just like, yeah, that's funny. I like that. And he was like, okay. And then the next thing I knew, he kind of set up a Facebook page and Instagram page for me. And that was it. I didn't actually take it seriously at any point, to be honest with you. It was just a bit of a laugh. So yeah.
Yeah, well, you're the baker.
I am the baker, yeah.
That's your shtick.
That's kind of what I do.
You're not the technological wizard.
What do you mean? I managed to plug my headphones into my phone. I think like that was a great step forward.
Was that on the first attempt as well?
No, Jez had to show me.
Shut up.
I try. I really try. Technology and I have never been very good friends. I disconnected my Wi-Fi and I was surprised that all my data went. I didn't realize I had to reconnect it. Jez was not impressed with me. What can I say?
These life skills, you'll pick them up along the way.
I doubt it. I'm quite happy to stay the way I am.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll stay the way I am. Thank you.
Well, let's talk about baking then. So that's something you are a bit more proficient in. I've known that you bake and your family are all into baking and cooking since I've known you, really, which I suppose I could probably say something about as well, which is we've worked at Lush together.
We did. We do?
About 3 years ago. We suppose technically we still do.
Technically we still do.
Who knows?
Depends if you decide to kind of come back and slum it with us again, I suppose.
Yeah, so we're at different shops at the moment.
Abandoned me.
That's how we know each other. I've always known that you are into baking. I was interested to know, have you always been into baking, or is this something you've just kind of grown into recently?
It was just kind of, it really actually happened when I was living in Argentina. I went over there when I was pregnant with my first daughter, and I didn't really have anything to do. And the lady across the street from us baked. And I used to just kind of, she was it was a really, really like small town that we lived in. And she baked. And she was one of the only people that actually spoke English. So I used to go around to her place and I would help her bake cakes. And she just kind of taught me what she knew. And from there, then when I came back home, I was a full-time mom, and it just kind of became kind of like something that I really enjoyed doing. It was quite therapeutic. It was quite nice to make stuff for my little people and see them enjoy it. And after a while, anytime I kind of bought like a cake from the supermarket, it never seemed to taste right, and what I made always, in my opinion, tasted better. So it just kind of grew from that, really, to be honest with you.
How old were you when you were in Argentina? Were you in your 20s? I know it's a very personal question, but
yeah, I was going to say, what you're saying, Len.
Bit of a faux pas.
I mean, I'm still only in my 20s, Darren. I think you'll find if you squint really, really hard. Now, I was 22 when I went to Argentina.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, first time.
The reason I ask, I have a motive here.
Okay.
I was curious about what sort of skills you can develop later on. I mean, it's not really late on in life, but for some people who are a little bit younger.
Wow, you're just making me feel so bad.
This is not my intention. This has gone awry, hasn't it?
This is what I love about you. I've missed this so much. Like developing, like
what I mean to say,
yeah,
is for somebody when I was younger. Let's put it this way: when I was younger, in my tens or whatnot, teens, I used to look up to somebody who was 20, and you thought that was quite late to develop a skill. I didn't pick up a musical instrument until I was about 16.
Yeah.
And by most people's standards, that's quite late.
It would be considered too old to learn how to play music, definitely. I think, I know what you're getting at. I'm not offended, don't worry. Only a little bit on a Tuesday. Yeah, I think a lot of the time when it kind of comes, like I've actually just started doing something new now. I've started doing felting. Have you ever heard of that, needle felting?
I do not know what that is.
No. It's very good for. It's basically taking like wool, like untreated wool, dyed but like not treated, not spun into yarn or anything like that, and you kind of mold it into like different shapes and things. So you can get like, like those felted bowls that you see like in those kind of like hipster crafty shops and things like that. You don't know?
Well, I think so.
You do know. You can turn it into.
I do know.
You know. You can turn it into all sorts of things, and it's just basically getting a needle and like jabbing it through the yarn and making it into all different shapes and patterns and things like that. It's really, really cool. But I've literally just started doing that last week, but it's really good fun. So I don't think you ever.
What kind of led you to that? That's quite obscure.
Okay, Dee showed me a video of somebody doing it online, and it just kind of so happened to coincide with just before my birthday. So I asked for a felting kit for my birthday. But yeah, it's really, really good fun. And I don't think you're ever too old to pick up something new. If you want to do it, you'll do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter if you make mistakes. If you're enjoying the process of learning, you'll quite happily keep on learning.
Yeah, and I am a sort of person, at least, who really does enjoy learning stuff. Yeah. I find it quite rewarding. More engaging than just repeating the same thing. A piano is a good example of something I have only really been into for maybe about 2-3 years. And I'd always been fairly familiar with it. I understood it from a theoretical point of view. Yeah. I knew what the keys were supposed to do and what your hands were meant to move like, but I couldn't actually do it in practice for quite a number of years. And it's only really like early 30s, like 31, 32, that I actually started getting into it a lot more.
And what prompted you to do that, though? What was it that made you decide that it was something you wanted to do?
I think it was just a practical move for me. I'm the sort of person who I always think I try to be wide read for the same reason that I don't actually know when I'm going to need a skill. But as a musician, it's just useful to be well versed in A, B, and C, say whether that's different instruments or the music theory aspect of it, or recording, like the sonic spectrum, like proper geeky nerdery music production sort of stuff.
You lost me at the word and sonic. So I started thinking of hedgehogs. Sorry.
Not that kind.
Oh, shame.
But I always thought with music, at least, it was just another way of looking at the same thing, music. And I do the same thing with philosophy. I read books from all over the place, like different sciences, like biology, psychology, and then I'll read things that are pure philosophy. I'll read things that are like practical and ethics and all. Anyway, different kinds of things, because I don't actually know when that's going to be useful, but it just makes me more
I
well-rounded.
think it helps you think in different ways as well. I've never read a book and not kind of taken something from it. Do you know what I mean? Like, even if it's just the way that it's written and the language that they use, you're always learning something slightly different. It alters your perception slightly, and that's always really, really interesting to take away. You've got to kind of like be open to new ways of thinking. I mean, you're saying like about learning new skill. I mean, over during lockdown, I've spent a lot of time gardening, and I've learned so much, like just by kind of going out there and trying. And I've never really like, I've always liked having a garden, liked planting stuff, but like things like permaculture and planting plants together because they support each other, and then understanding like certain plants grow better with others, actually has been a whole new world for me, and it's made me really like into it. Do you know what I mean? Like, to be able to plant stuff and plant other things with it because it adds something to the soil, or it fixes nitrogen, or it helps the roots to develop and things like that. And, I think you
Yeah.
can always kind of learn new things. And I think you can keep on growing as a person. I mean, if I knew now what I knew in my 20s, I guess I'd still be trying to find new things to be learning anyway. I'd probably kind of gone down the whole, what, I probably would have kind of gone down more of a kind of like biological, botanical route and started trying to understand a bit more about structures and things like that, because that's something that really interests me as well. But yeah, and you're never too old to learn new things. What's next on your
Yeah, I
learning
think it's
list?
a false perception.
Definitely.
People think there's a clock running or judge themselves by other people's standards.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I've definitely always felt that. I mean, I'm kind of, again, self-reflecting a little bit, but with music, I started really late. With tea, I didn't get into tea as much as I am now until 5-6 years ago. Philosophy, I didn't start until 2 years ago. And they're the three pillars of everything I do.
Yeah,
I don't do anything else. And 20-year-old me would never have predicted 30-year-old me.
exactly.
And so I don't suppose I could predict 40-year-old me either. And
I'd never want to try, because the whole part of the fun is seeing what happens in life. And then, I mean, when I first got pregnant, I never imagined that I'd actually have children. It was never part of my plan. And when it
yeah,
happened, becoming a mum, I learned so much, and it was such an incredible journey, and it changed me so much. I learned more from my children than I sometimes think that they've ever learned from me. I think anything can be a learning process, and anything is a kind of creative journey. It just depends on your perception. You can either try and hide away from it, or you can kind of look at it and kind of say, like, well, how has this changed me? And be open to it as well.
yeah. It's that idea of does the same person read a book? Which is to say, if you start a book, are you the same person when you finished it?
Ah, taking something different from it.
Yeah, well, and you're not, I don't think. I don't think you could be. You couldn't be the same person who comes out of reading a book
No.
or really doing anything. Like, I couldn't be the same person who comes out of this conversation. I must be changed in some way.
Oh my God, you're such a philosophy student.
Yeah.
That's a, that's,
Sorry.
that's a compliment. That's a compliment,
Yeah,
honestly.
I don't apologize truthfully when I apologize for
Mm.
being the way that I am. That's just who I am. That's how I think. So, but I don't think, yeah, I try to look at things in like a process, and I dig the process. It's always changing, and I'm the same. I'm no different. Like, who I am is just this kind of gradually unfolding thing, and it changes. And I'm always looking for the new thing, because I don't think I'm done with myself, if that
I
makes
think
sense.
No, I think that's actually a really healthy attitude to have. I think quite often people who tend to get to a point where they think they've done everything can actually become quite depressed and unmotivated.
Mm.
I think you have to keep challenging yourself. I think there's Did you ever read that report about shamanic studies and mental health,
I'm not
and
sure.
how there was this report, and it's basically I can't quote who it was written by. My memory doesn't work like that. But they were talking about the effect of kind of like using creative outlets, and also kind of like the kind of traditional ways, like shamanism, like would have like kind of brought in lots of different rituals and practices, and like creative, what we would kind of consider to be creative expression. And they used that to kind of like treat mental illness, and by allowing people a way of expressing themselves, it actually helped them a great deal. Like they kind of say, like a lot of the times, like with depression, it is kind of like this kind of form of stagnation, and that we need to actually be pushing ourselves kind of forward in order to be able to overcome that. It's very easy to kind of say like, oh, anyway, sorry, I've lost what I was saying.
Well, I was going
It's
to
just,
add something. I've had a couple of conversations on the podcast that spring to mind. I had one with Ella Burns-Robbins, who is a performance poet. You
I
know
love
Ella.
Ella. Yeah, I love her
And
species. She's amazing.
Moby Slick, who is Ebby Lou Horner from Wakefield Lush. She's a visual designer, so she does. She's kind of like digital design, and both of them
way beyond me.
have dabbled with art therapy. And so both of those conversations, we do speak a bit more. We kind of get into it a bit more about like the effects of art on mental health. So they might be interesting for you if you're kind of into that. Anyway,
I have to check them out.
What sprung to mind for me though, when you were talking about that, was you mentioned how once you feel like you've done everything, you can feel like you stagnate and there's nowhere to go. I don't know if you've heard this story about, I don't know if there's a particular astronaut or if it's just a generalization, or maybe this is a apocryphal story, I don't really know, but it's about NASA astronauts who kind of go and do what they do, go into the moon and traveling in space. And when they come back down to Earth, depression is really common in them because they've got, I mean, nothing else left. I mean, you can imagine if you've been to space and you've done that, I can really sympathize with the idea of thinking, okay, well, how do you improve on that?
It is kind of like pretty much a kind of like life-defining experience. Let's put it like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you've got to. It would be difficult to do that. I mean, how I think about that is that to be an astronaut in the first place, you've got to be so single-minded that
they have to do so much, don't they, to be able to get to that state.
And there's a very determinate goal: go to space. And once you've ticked that off, if you spent your entire life doing that to go to space, then okay, well, now what? You've got to kind of reevaluate everything you spent your life doing and everything you know about you.
I've never really thought of that. Like, if that is your one goal, is to be an astronaut and go into space, what do you do after that?
Yeah, get depressed, apparently.
I was going to say, maybe they should take up needle felting. Maybe that would be the solution. It's helped me.
There's a charity foundation there, I think. Felting for astronauts.
I think we should set it up. You could do an astronaut tea.
I'm on board already.
Yes. I can see the cogs are whirling.
They are. The cogs are always whirling. They don't stop.
What would you put in an astronaut tea blend?
Do you know, actually, it's funny. I'm not doing an astronaut blend at the moment, but I am doing a flying blend.
Are you?
Yeah.
Go on, what's in a flying blend?
Well, it's an odd one. It's actually a music blend. Are you familiar with the song Learn to Fly by the Foo Fighters?
Yes, I am.
Familiar, but not passionate.
Familiar. That's a whole other topic of conversation.
Okay, well, that song anyway. So it's quite well-spirited, uplifting song. And so,
yes, it is.
Well, on the one hand, it's quite uplifting. It's got that feeling of brightness to it, and that everything will be okay. And on the other side of it, there's something that feels quite grounded about it, and homely and comfortable. And so, our approach to some of the music blends, at least, and this is a good example of one of them, is that we try to think of words that match to feelings, and then we try to match those feelings to a blend or a taste. So this is a little bit like you said that you can, it's like different languages with different instruments is like different languages. And I kind of think of the same thing with taste and tea in this case.
Yeah.
So we were using words like uplifting to describe it. And so for us, that was things that made us feel bright. And that was citruses. So it was lots of like lemons and oranges, these sorts of things. On the first, we've just had the second revision back through today, actually. I was just trying that before I got on the call. And we had the uplifting, that bit was right of the blend, but it didn't have anything to ground it. And because it's a rock song, like kind of it's edgy guitars, it's not too heavy, but there's something there. And it was just lacking that. So we had to have a conversation about, okay, well, how do we get the distorted rock tone of a song into a blend?
Yeah.
And so what we said is like there's kind of like a warmth there underneath it, and it's got to have something that's almost like a bit more, not too aggressive. Something like that for me would be like ginger, where it's kind of got that thing on the back of your throat when you eat it, and there's a sharpness to it. There's like a bite. So we've gone for aniseed, which is a bit sweet but warming.
Oh, like a little bit more licoricey as well.
Yeah. So we added that to it, and we're still not quite there, but this is roughly how we work on the music blends. There's a lot of communication, there's a lot of back and forth, but it's about putting words to things that you wouldn't usually put words to, like tastes and feelings and music. Talking about it in a bit of an unusual way.
Yeah, this is what we do when we're doing the ginger beer. We try to do we've done like kind of like 4 elemental ginger beers so far, and then we did like a solstice one as well. So it was like trying to kind of think like, what is that kind of feeling of like the summer solstice? What would you kind of like, what foods would we have had around about that time? How do we work those into like a ginger beer kind of flavor as well? So yeah, totally. And it's trying to kind of like get that balance so that everything works in harmony to kind of like create something that will kind of create a feeling, but without having to kind of like explain what that feeling is.
Yeah, it all boils down to the feeling, really. That's the rough concept in the middle of all of these things, I think. I've described it before on the podcast, so maybe people will be sick of me doing that, but I'm going to do it again anyway, which is I do think of them as different languages. So when I've been speaking about some of the blends in the past, especially the music blends, actually, I always think of them like the tea blend and the song like being to a feeling what French and English and Spanish are to a thing, if that kind of makes sense. So it's just like the French and the English and the Spanish all have a different word for saying table, for example. And the tea blend and the music and the design, like the artwork for it, that's the same thing for some kind of feeling. They're just for different languages, different explanations for something.
It's a different expression, but has the same kind of like root at the end of it.
That's the virtue for me that preceded me doing philosophy, but I think I've always had that kind of mindset of there being a bit more that's not really said for things like tea and music and really all creativity in general.
I think it's always that kind of like moment of surprise, isn't it? When you're a teenager and you've got a favorite song and you realize how many other people absolutely love the same song as you. And you think, well, do you all see it the same way I see it? Or do you see it in a completely different way? Like, do you know what I mean? Because you kind of feel like it belongs to you. And there's almost that kind of feeling of like a little bit like, oh, so it belongs to you guys all like it as well. But do you like it for the same reasons I like it? Does it make you feel the same way it makes me feel? And do you know what I mean? There's almost that kind of sense of disconnect from it. Like I found it really, really, really strange when I realized like everybody listened to stuff, and really weird to think that other people could feel the same way I did. I don't know why. Probably I'm a bit odd, to be honest with you.
No, I don't think so. I think that's fairly common. There's a thing in I don't think this is even in philosophy. It's just something I've heard before about like you're looking at colours, and it's like, how do you know that the other person is seeing the same shade? It seems a bit like that.
I was adamant that my youngest daughter was colourblind because she kept saying different colours, like you know what I mean, like mixing up the colours so much. And I kept thinking that she was colourblind, but it turns out she isn't. She was just messing around with me, just playing with my mind. But it kind of did do that thing of like, so many shades are so similar. So how do you differentiate between them, and how can you tell? I don't know. This is where we're going to move into this kind of question of like kind of perception and what do I perceive, and if I see a giraffe, do you actually see an elephant? And this is going to go very deep, Darren. You realise this, don't you?
That's fine.
Are you sure you want to go down this rabbit hole?
Absolutely, always.
God, it really is like cashing up all over again.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually got other people listening.
So in the philosophical literature that I'm aware of, I think that more commonly they would call they'd break that into two different things, and they would say that there's epistemology on one side and ontology on one side, and those words are fancy ways of just saying, most people who would say ontology is like the thing in itself. So that's the thing before anybody looks at it. It's just there. It's like some object in space or some thing that's there.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side of that is some perceiver of it. And so there's a question of like how much of the perceiver is in the object. And they break that down into things called universals and particulars in object. Mm-hmm. So the universals, and I might get this wrong because I haven't read this stuff for quite a while, but
I'm sure somebody will correct you.
I can't remember which way round it is, if I'm totally honest, but I think the universals are the things like, one of them is things like colours. It's like just redness, for example, or like woodness, like the feeling of wood, like all of these things. That's one category of thing. And then there's another category of things that are just particular to that specific object.
Right.
Does that kind of make sense?
Kind of makes sense, yeah. So it's that kind of thing of like you can see something, and before you've even seen it and perceived it, it already has essentially what it is already there, but it's your interpretation of it. And there's certain things. Is that right?
I think more or less. Again, I'm going to fumble with the philosophy because I can't remember it too deeply. It was a cursory read in my first year of philosophy, and I've forgotten much of it. But the gist of it was a question about what properties does an object have, and what properties do you put on it, or do you attribute to it? So, is the redness is there redness in a rose, or do you put redness on it? And to what degree are you doing that?
Okay. So whereas like some people could look at a rose and kind of be like, oh, that's like a kind of very crimson blood red. Other people might say, no, that's more of a like bright coral kind of colour.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
And so the object has got something there that's signalling redness, but then the perceiver is putting something else onto it to make it kind of their own way.
Yeah. So is that kind of thing, like some people look at a rose and they think it's absolutely beautiful, whereas other people look at a rose and think, nah, can give or take kind of thing.
Yeah.
So take it or leave it.
Yeah, I think the beauty thing's a little bit different.
Are you sure?
Yeah, well, only in how philosophers look at it. So they would say that I think they would say that that's got more of a personal thing to it, and then there would be a separate argument about whether aesthetics and beauty is objective or not.
Because I was going to say, because surely like the depth of color that you attribute to it is also as aesthetic as thinking whether or not it is a beautiful thing or not. Like that, they're both of them are aesthetic essentially, aren't they?
Yeah, I suppose that is a point.
I don't know. I'm getting confused.
No, I think what you're saying is that in principle they're very similar. Like if you're putting on, if an object has some qualities and one of them is redness, and I look at it and add or shape that redness in some way, and I'm kind of manipulating it, given my physiology, I can only see it in certain ways, and I'm interpreting that data of those qualities, those properties of that thing, and going, that's red. That process is no different for beauty. I think I would only say that the beauty seems more like a judgment than color.
It's more of an emotional response.
Yeah, one seems descriptive, one seems maybe prescriptive instead. Like if you're looking at a thing, you don't like saying something is red is not you're not really saying it as if it's an opinion, or it's got no feeling tone to that. It's fairly dispassionate to say that is red, whereas beauty seems to be a bit more personal and more of a
Yeah,
judgment about something.
it's more of a kind of it's definitely more of an emotional kind of like connotation that you put to something.
Yeah.
Okay, I concede. You are right. I'll give you that one.
Well, I never think I'm, again, do you know what? This is, as I was saying earlier, I never really think that I'm right with anything, because it's like accepting you're right is the same in principles as accepting you're done and you're finished. Like, I like that process to keep unfolding. So I just, even if it feels like I'm right, if anybody ever exceeds to me and says you're right, then I start thinking, well, I'm probably
I
wrong.
must be wrong.
What am I wrong about?
And that's reverse psychology.
Am I mad?
Yes, yes, you are. It's okay though.
I think
It's better to be mad.
it is better to be mad. I just enjoy the spirit of philosophy, and I like to think, and that's just how I work.
But
It's
when does it become almost like detrimental? Because this is one of the things that I have found recently, and definitely with like certain people in my life, that this is almost this kind of thing of like to overthink. And when you're overthinking, you can almost think your way through something so much that then there's no point to doing something. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
it does. I think
Like,
most people, overthinking is an interesting word, and I think a lot of people would use the word overthinking for me if they don't like what I'm saying. Like,
Darren, you're an overthinker.
yeah, I've had that before. Uh,
Oh, bless you.
they would say something like, "No, this is simple and it's obvious, and you're overthinking it," and that's different to. There's two meanings to overthink there for me. One of them is that I'm I'm thinking too much about something that doesn't actually need it, and that might be one thing. And
Yeah.
the other side of that is that actually, no, I'm what I would object to that claim usually is that no, I'm thinking about it just at a different level. That's all.
Mm.
And so I'm not overthinking implies that I've been thinking about it too much. Where I think sometimes no, I don't think about it too much. I'm just focused my thinking about it on one particular thing and then another thing about it.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. It's like if you went, you know, if you could go into a coffee shop and you were choosing what drink to have and you stood there and you're kind of thinking, well, I really like this. I really like, you know, like having a latte, but at the same time, maybe I'm more in the mood for hot chocolate. That would be overthinking. You know, it's just a simple like, what do you feel like right now? But then in certain kind of things, I think when you're having a conversation with somebody, you kind of almost have to. I kind of look at it as like playing devil's advocate. It's kind of almost trying to think about the things that they don't think about. And then that's, I think, is when you can be accused of overthinking. But I know, like in myself, when I
Mm,
start thinking about something, I can overthink it until it kind of gets to a point where I can't make a choice because I thought about so much that both any choice I make, do you know what I mean? It's like all the choices and all the variables are so well thought out that it's impossible to make a choice because I know that
mm.
whatever I choose, it's going to be detrimental in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought your example was going to go somewhere else with the coffee shop. Can I tell you where I thought it was going to go? Because I
You're
actually
going
think
to
it's
get a
quite
muffin.
clever.
Okay.
No, so I thought you were going to outline an analogy that was quite. Well, anyway,
Okay.
I'll tell
Okay.
you what it is, and you can just tell me what you think. So, overthinking and thinking to me is like going into a coffee shop and thinking, which is what I do, would be like having a coffee and drinking it. And then the next day, coming back, maybe I have the same thing again. And then
Yeah.
I just repeat that. And over time, I've done a lot of thinking about something, but nothing crazy. Overthinking, how most people use that word, would be like me going into the coffee shop and drinking a coffee until it's literally flowing out the sides of my mouth because I'm just and constantly pouring more and more, and it's just overflowing me. It's all over my head.
That's
It's
such
all
a great
down
visual
me.
image.
Yeah.
What?
But I think that's how most people you say overthinking, they're saying you're doing too much right now and you're not doing yourself any good. And I actually don't do that. I have the same process to thinking that I have with creativity, really, which is lots of breaks. Like I break off all the time. So if I'm thinking about something, or if I have an opinion about something and I'm more invested in that opinion, usually it's because I've spent a good amount of
Actually,
time
yeah,
reading
researching it.
about it or looking into it. And so overthinking implies that actually I haven't done that. All I'm doing right now is trying to cram all of that information into 5 seconds. And that's not really what's happening for me.
What
I
situations
wouldn't want to claim that
what situations do you feel like you've been kind of like accused of overthinking?
it's usually when it's an argument, and I use an argument like a philosopher would use the word, which is not a negative thing at all. It's just it's discourse. It's two sides of a coin.
Yeah.
That's all. And usually when I'm having a conversation with the layperson who's maybe not going into a conversation in the same spirit as me, which is fairly open. I'm open to either side. And as I say, if we come to the conclusion that I'm right, I usually start second guessing myself and go, but there must be something there that I'm not right about.
Right.
That's the spirit that I have every conversation with. I don't presume that I'm right. And a lot of the time I just think questions are fun. So I'll ask questions and say, what do you think? And it's usually a question about what some people take as a given or as obvious, because that's what, for me, what philosophy is trying to do. And what I'm trying to do with this podcast is the same thing, really. It's a good example of it. So it has been in arguments, let's say, about one thing or another. And it's the criticism is that I'm overthinking or I'm being pedantic, those sorts of things. And my reply usually is like, listen, I don't think you're thinking about it enough. You're underthinking.
Do you think that there's a kind of like general, do you think it kind of comes down to this thing of like people are afraid to think about things too far, or do you think it is just a genuine thing of like, no, that is my opinion and it is set in stone?
I don't know. I think thinking is just a skill, and I don't know. Like philosophy is really going hardcore in on that skill, and most people get that skill from going into anything academic, really, writing stuff for university. And I've just decided to. I mean, I'm doing it at a master's level, and I took about 10 years off between getting my degree in music and going back and doing philosophy. So it was quite a big gap there. But I think a lot of the time it's too time consuming to think about something that you've already made your mind up about. And it's much easier to just go, well, I feel like that's the right answer. Good enough for me. And to be honest, that's fair enough, because a lot of the time that's right. And your feelings they are right enough.
You kind of trust in your instinct. Because I think, because we were having this conversation a little bit about like social media, and somebody was kind of saying to me, oh, I think social media kind of means that people don't read anymore. They kind of take things at face value and that's it. Do you know what I mean? And if like when you actually kind of like read about things, you kind of get a bit more perhaps of a deeper understanding sometimes. But then other people, I think you can find some good things out on social media, but the kind of nature of thinking sometimes seems to be a little bit forgotten.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, or very few people who I've spoken to on social media take me in the spirit that I expect them to. I don't really use it so much anymore. I haven't done for a couple of months, really, like especially Facebook. But I use most of them just for work, really, which I think is the only way I can really use those things without losing my marbles a little bit. Because people find it quite easy to be nasty on social media. Yeah, and so I've had so many conversations with people on Facebook that I would never have with them in person. It's like an alternate reality. And on Facebook they think it's quite acceptable to be pretty rude, mean, and almost bullyish.
Yeah, it is quite surprising. I think sometimes I have to admit, like I've never been I mean, you as you take the mick out of me all the time, but I'm not a massive technological person at the best of times, and I'm not really a massive social media user. But I've seen like the way that sometimes somebody will express an opinion, and depending, it's kind of like you're saying about like deception. You can read something that somebody's put up and people will misconstrue it and then completely blow it out of context. Do you know what I mean? Or decide that it's offended them in some way. And I think that it does kind of come to that point where it's like, do you think like with social media, it kind of discourages us from thinking on and jumping on a bandwagon? Or do you think it is a kind of thing of like, it kind of almost gives people, do you ever think the idea of like having a discourse and having a conversation is possible on social media, or do you think it is more of a kind of like philosophy?
Well, I don't really blame social media for how people behave on it. I don't think it's the fault of social media. I think it's just we don't really know what to do with it. We're kind of inexperienced with communicating in just text, and it's quite difficult to stomach and understand how to frame that in our heads. I had a conversation with D, which my partner, different to the D that you referred to.
Sorry, earlier. We've got our own D.
Should clarify that. I had a conversation with D about how are you supposed to frame Facebook or social media in your own head, because if you're having a conversation with, let's give an example. If I were to post something on my own Facebook page, what does that mean when somebody else comments on it? And it's almost like me being in my own house and somebody else walking into my front room and just telling me their opinion about something completely unprecedented, unwarranted. It's like, why are you here?
Yeah, exactly. Somebody off the street.
The block function. Yeah, the blocking function, for example, is a way of saying, excuse me, leave. What are you doing? You're in my house. Yeah. I mean, I don't really ever use that function. I don't think I ever have, but it's an example of how strange that it is. And so I've had an experience recently, which was pretty nasty and like quite hurtful, I thought, that of people piling on me on a Facebook thread, and people that I actually quite like, because I was just, again, I foolishly going into a conversation well-spirited and thinking that people would take me on for those values. They didn't.
Oh, okay.
Maybe there was some fault on my part there. I don't really accept that or buy that. But
it couldn't be my fault, no.
Well, there's parts of it that are my fault. I mean, I don't really want to get into the specifics of it because it just seems out of place on this podcast.
Sorry,
people really want to know. I'm sure they can ask me. But it was my point really just being about how to frame the role of how that works. And it did feel like when people that I knew and quite liked were piling on me and telling me how disappointed they were in me. And that, to me, as an outsider, that would imply that I've said something grotesque. I never really did that. I never would, and I would hope after doing, by the time this podcast airs, it's about 13 hours of podcasting, that people would have got the feel for me and know that that's not my intention or desire to, but that's how people react anyway, because given what they have on social media, what else are they to do? I was talking about the framing though, and that felt to me like people just entering my home, walking through the front door and all pointing the finger and tell me how awful I am. Yeah. And I just couldn't stop them. One after the other, just more and more. The more that they did it, the more that kept piling through the door. Meanwhile, I'm just sat there going, "This is awful."
But
this is awful? And like,
isn't that a sense of mob mentality though, as well? The fact that because one person does it, then another person does it, and it's almost like a self-fulfilling cycle. Like they encourage each other, and the next person becomes more extreme. And do you know what I mean? It's almost like they're kind of.
Yeah, it was exactly like that. There was in a particular example. There was a person who I have not spoken to for about 4 years who piled on, just unraveling all of his thoughts about me.
Wow.
They'd secretly harbored for years, apparently, about how I'm all of these nasty things. And I just thought, I haven't heard from you.
He's like, you don't know
this
who
is
I
what
am.
You're coming out with.
Oh, God.
Because somebody else has said something on Facebook. Are you mad? I mean, to put this into context, I suppose context I'm happier sharing is I've mentioned this on an earlier podcast, so I don't feel so awkward about bringing it up. But I said something about, it was when the voting cycle was going around, and I said, like, why should we vote? Like, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't here, but like, why in principle should we vote? I just want to know. And what I don't want is reasons for who to vote for.
No, but you want.
So when I'm saying why should we vote, I don't want like vote for this party, which I think most things what I'm hearing about why I should vote were reasons to vote for a particular party. And I said, not those. anything other than
Yeah.
those. And I asked some people it, and they would just go off the rails with me.
And yet you're not the first person to actually ask that. There's a lot of people that after the last election really, really kind of turned around and said, like, our whole voting system, everything about it is monumentally unfair. Do you know, there's a lot of calls for changes in how the voting system works. So it's not as though what you asked is that outrageous a question. It's, it's,
Well, yeah,
it's provocative.
I think people took it like how you took it there, which is if it was as if I was saying we shouldn't vote. Why is that?
But that's not what
I wasn't quite saying that. Yeah, I was just asking philosophy wise, like why in principle, what are good reasons to persuade somebody who isn't sure about voting to vote that aren't just appeals to one particular party? And like I have those reasons now because I've thought about it for quite a long while. Like, and I think it's just you have a moral obligation to as part of the society you're in. But most people don't have those reasonings because they just go on intuition alone and just go, well, I feel like it's right, so it's right. And that's not good enough for me.
Well, I know a lot of people, and I had some conversations with people online after the last election that hadn't voted, and they literally said, like, I didn't vote because no matter what party I voted for, they didn't feel that anything would be different, out of the two major parties, and that was literally it. And they said, and a lot of them were actually older people, even older than me, Darren. But a lot of them were older people, and they were kind of saying like they didn't feel that anything would change, and they kind of felt, and it was this kind of sense of like there was no positive momentum for them. There was a kind of general sense of like, I've heard all of this before, and every time this has been said before, no matter which party has got in, nothing has ever changed, and there was a real kind of sense of that, which I didn't really, I think sometimes I can be kind of accused of perhaps fence sitting a little bit. I didn't agree or disagree, but at the same time, you kind of almost have to kind of say like, well, if we don't try and make change, then how will things ever change? You have to have enough people wanting to make a positive change before it can happen, So
yeah, exactly. That's how I feel about it too. I'm quite moderate, like politically at least, quite moderate. So I kind of
I just want everyone
can
to be
also
happy.
be accused of fence sitting.
Yeah,
yeah. I get accused. Fence sitting and devil's advocate are usually things that people say, or that I like debate. I really don't. I really don't
like conflict.
Well, do you know, it's an odd one as well, because again, going back to that thing of people, Facebook being a little bit like people coming to my house to tell me what they think. Most people who've told me how awful I am are people who also accuse me of enjoying debate. And even people who haven't said anything negative think that I like debate because sometimes I post something that people seem to get heated or upset about. And I don't really. But I don't debate. I post what I think on my own Facebook, and then people start arguing with me. And then they tell me that I like debate.
Well, hold on a second.
I think you like debate. You're the one I don't really go out of my way to tell anybody else that they're right or wrong. If they post something and I disagree with it, I usually just ignore it.
Yeah,
I don't like debate. I find it hard and it upsets me.
I think there's a lot of really, really big feelings out there in the world at the moment, and there's a lot going on, and it's very, very difficult because you can try and express your feelings, but you'll always get that one person that will twist it, no matter how, no matter how, unless you're kind of like saying things in a very, very loud way. I mean, I very rarely post it on Facebook, but I did put a post up today about consumer buying power. And that was what I was trying to say, was like, a lot of people kind of talk about these, like a certain big pub chain that's just opened up, and after the way that the billionaire owner treated his workers at the start of lockdown, and it's just literally like I shared an app and said like, and it showed you where there was independent pubs locally, so that you didn't have to go to this massive, great big chain, and things like that. And I'm a big believer, like if you want to make change in our society today, you have to do it with where you're choosing to spend your money, because that's literally the only thing that big businesses understand. If billionaires want to be billionaires, they have to appeal to the market. And if the market is,
Yeah, totally.
if the market is kind of totally going along with what they're selling, then they're going to win. Do you know? So
Yeah.
I do kind of think like, yes, you can use social media, but there's always that kind of difficulty. Like I've had it before as well, where something I've put up has just been completely taken out of context and kind of almost used against me. It's like, but and it's when you have to actually point out like the wording of what you've said. You say, if you actually look, this is exactly what I said, word for word, and you've taken that, but you've got that out of it. And I don't understand the two. I don't understand how you could take one thing that I've said and then turn it into something else. But I think it just shows the volatile nature of people, is the fact that if they want to see you in a certain way, there's nothing really that you can do about that. Do you know, if people have got this impression of you, which isn't nice to think, but then what can you do?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I care more about my own well-being.
Yeah,
well, I care the appropriate amount. So I just don't use those websites for anything other than work anymore, and I feel all the better for it.
Yeah.
I mean, my recommendation for most people would to do the same. It just doesn't benefit anybody. We can't. I don't think we know how to use it, so it just ends up making you feel pretty
I think it started off.
dreadful.
Yeah, I think it started off, but I think I'm a big fan of Bill Hicks. Have you ever heard of Bill Hicks?
Yeah,
okay, good. And the quote of like, we're all one consciousness experience itself subjectively, and I hear that, and then I kind of think like, so if you see something that you don't like or you disagree with, that is actually, according to the Bill Hicks kind of like moral philosophy, that is actually like an aspect of ourselves. Because if we're all kind of like from the same one universe, yeah, and the same one energy, that's a different aspect of my consciousness. So what can I learn from that aspect? I can learn what I don't like, but at the same time, is there anything that I can do that is going to change that aspect of myself? Like, do you know what I mean? You kind of have this almost kind of sense of like, there's a lot about myself that I don't like.
Yeah. Well, no, same. I wasn't really agreeing there in the way that you could take that. Yeah, there's a lot to not like. Elle.
I know, and I wake up every day and I struggle with this.
No, I don't believe that. But I get what you're saying, because I feel the same. Like I feel looking inward on me that there's a lot to not like, but I work on it, and the easiest way to work on it is to kind of see it in other people, and watch their behavior and go, I really don't like that person, or I really like that person, and go, well, why? Why do I feel that way? And is it because I can see something in me that they do? Arrogance is one for me. I really don't like arrogance because I am partial to being like that.
That's kind of good. It takes a lot to be able to admit something, like something negative about yourself.
I could go on.
2 hours later, just get it started. Yeah.
I like to review myself. You've already heard me doing it a few times. I kind of do review myself a lot, and I'm constantly looking back on myself and just thinking.
That takes a lot of humility, doesn't it? And I mean, like when you were kind of saying about how people were kind of jumping, like all piling on you and coming into your house and saying things, I just wonder how many people that do stuff like that actually have the humility to stop and kind of say, like, hold on a second. By saying those negative things, all I did was put out more negativity into the universe. And do they ever have the opportunity to kind of stop and kind of say, like, I could have really hurt somebody with that? And was that did what they said actually, did it deserve that response? Do you know what I mean? It's like I kind of feel like a lot of time it's like it takes a lot of humility to actually kind of self-analyze and self-evaluate and kind of say, like, actually there are a lot of things that I need to work on as an individual. I'm far more interested in working on myself and trying to be a better person. I'd never want to be perfect, but trying to be a better person than I am in trying to change other people,
Yeah. Well, my only point of that really was with social media is I don't blame anybody for behaving poorly or in bad faith on social media, because I think that's the sort of behavior that it rewards. So it's quite difficult to behave well and in good spirits on social media. The whole thing is structured to downvote that behavior.
But I
So
wonder
and
why,
upvote
though.
the very worst behavior. I think it's just easier. It's easier and it's a business. So it's like the media. A lot of people blame the media for bad news, but we read it.
Yeah, exactly.
Whose fault is
Do you know,
it? We keep buying the newspapers.
There was once, I can't remember where I heard this, but I mean, it might be total fiction, to be honest with you, but I remember once being told about how there was a newspaper that only published good news, and it went out of business because nobody wanted to hear it.
That's the saddest story I've ever heard.
And humanity wept. No, but yeah, apparently, like, nobody was interested in hearing about good things happening. It's like, so I read a book once. No, I've read several books. Please don't be fooled. But one of them was about one of these things about. I don't know. It wasn't a book. It was a friend of mine was showing me this kind of like abundance meditation course, and you kind of did it for 21 days, and every day there was a different task. And one of them was about like welcoming abundance into your life in all different forms. So, you know, find like kind of going from material, financial abundance right down to kind of spiritual abundance. So covering the full spectrum. And it was really, really interesting. And one of the things that I found the most interesting was there's a part of it where you kind of almost have to like look at your perceptions of wealth and money and like rich people, kind of quite specifically. And one of the things that I found out was that I really, my perception of the atypical like millionaire wealthy person was actually quite negative, because like most of the time in the media, what you see is people who have a lot of money and a lot of influence not really using it for a huge amount of good, you know. And I found that kind of like quite kind of challenging. So it led me on to then do like some personal research and look for examples of people who had a lot of money who actually used that money to do good and kind of like set up foundations. And there's like a billionaire who has been very, very quietly buying up like huge amounts of like green forestation, like green forest land. I can't speak anymore. I'm getting fatigued. In all over the world, like massive parts of the Amazon rainforest, and protecting it and conserving it and like, you know, looking after it. And I actually found that was really like really, really helpful, because I had all of these negative connotations, and then realizing that that was just kind of like one side of the coin, and almost kind of like it was a really kind of like good way to kind of like challenge and grow myself and change my perception of something. I've forgotten what we were really talking about. Sorry, I went off on a massive tangent.
Well, it's okay. We can bring it back around. We can bring it back. I think all in all is, yeah, I don't blame anybody for their behavior on social media. But in keeping with what you were just saying is, I act as if things are a process, and I'm not always certain about anything. So I'm open to having my mind changed. And so I read books and I listen to podcasts and I have conversations with people that will help me do that. And I do change my mind all the time, because I'm constantly self-reflecting. It's a mindfulness thing, really. That's where I picked that up from. I don't take anything for granted. And most people just think that's a kind of hippy dippy way of saying you should be grateful all the time. And I don't. I just don't take it for granted that, say, the sky's blue. Well, why is it? So I've got that kind of childlike curiosity of asking questions, just using the word why.
Such a child, honestly.
Well, it's having that spirit. I think there's a difference between childishness and childlike, and it is the curiosity that children have. I think I've tried to recapture that. I just certainly lost it.
Do you think that having that curiosity is what inspires creativity?
Yeah, oh yeah, fully. Because I'm always open to there being new ideas. And I think that's one of the things with the social media and why people behave poorly on it, is that so many people aren't open to new ideas, and they've already made their mind up about what's right and wrong. And they're just really expressing and trying to persuade people why they are already right. And I don't really go into anything with that spirit, whether it's writing music or philosophy or a conversation on a podcast, really anything I do, it's always with that spirit of like, I'm currently have this set of opinions about something that I think is, I can assign different values of rightness or wrongness to them, and they'll change as the conversation goes. And like you said, you can read a book or have a conversation and you're changed by it.
Yeah, definitely.
And even if it's a terrible experience, or it's a good, or if you would say it's a good or a bad experience, it can still be useful. And so that's how I just look at stuff. It's useful. I can make a use out of anything.
Yeah, my brother did a course that involved a lot of art when he was at uni, and we used to get into some real arguments about it. And because obviously, like, there's some artwork that, especially like I think like with more modern art, and people say, well, that's not art. It doesn't take any skill to do that. Do you know what I mean? Like one of the controversial ones was the bedroom. Do you remember? A lady did it it was an installation. I'm sure you must know it. I'm terrible with names and remembering things. I've got no memory capacity.
Yeah. I'm not good at that.
Yeah, it's a life skill. She basically like lived like in this kind of like bedroom setup for a year, and then did that as an art installation. And a lot of people were very much like, well, that's not art. And Daniel and I were talking about it, and one of the things he kind of said was like, anything that provokes a conversation, whether it's good or not, is art. Do you know what I mean? It's about, if you don't like it, you almost have to explain why you don't like something, which is then giving it a meaning. So anything that provokes a reaction or an emotional response in you is art in some form or another. You don't necessarily have to like it. You don't have to, particularly, it doesn't have to make you feel particularly great or good, but it is still a response. And therefore that gives it a meaning and value beyond just essentially what it is.
It's like saying, it's a question of what art is for, which is what this podcast is about. And it's a question of whether you, not really.
Sorry.
It's more, art is just one manifestation of creativity. So creativity, I think, is just a little bit more fundamental than that, and everybody's got a bit of it because it's just a way of thinking. But anyway,
I think everyone's
with art,
creative. Yeah,
I think it's a question of whether art is something you see or whether it's something you see yourself in. There's a famous quote by Friedrich Nietzsche, who's a philosopher, a German philosopher, I think.
Oh, really?
And he said something like, "Oh yeah, that was the name of giveaway."
Yeah. So, well, I mean, never heard of him before.
Yeah, the quote is, if you stare into the abyss for long enough, the abyss stares back into you. I might be paraphrasing somewhat. He's talking about looking at particularly kind of negative existential crisis sort of things. But in principle, it's the same with art. If you look at a piece of art long enough, the art stares back into you.
What you don't like about it maybe is a reflection of what you don't like about yourself.
Yeah. See, we've got back to profundity at the end of the podcast there as well. It's quite clever.
We have a skill.
Yeah, well, we haven't used that skill to talk about art or baking all that much.
I'm really, really sorry. I like to bake. It's good fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I'm happy about that.
I'm glad.
Well, I mean, we probably have been going a little over an hour, which is where I start to get a bit cloudy and foggy. So we could draw a line under it there.
I peaked. I literally peaked.
Yeah.
Ages ago. I'm really sorry for my insane ramblings.
No, they were no more insane than anything I would say.
That's
so
okay then.
You're in good company.
We've balanced each other out.
Where can people? Well, maybe we'll do this again and we'll speak about baking a bit more focused. I actually really am open to conversations going where they need to go.
Okay.
So this has been.
We can try again. We can talk about ginger beer if you want. We can talk about brewing.
The world is our oyster.
It certainly is. I don't eat oysters though. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, it's our lobster, whatever you like.
Okay, some sort of crustacean, basically.
Yeah, that's your limits there.
Okay.
Where can people find you online, your work or Jez's work, whichever you prefer?
So there's the Facebook, there's Instagram, and there's YouTube. So it's Death Metal Chef or Cutthroat Confections. Sorry, I've got an itchy eye. Scratch. Yeah.
It's okay. Good. Well, I will link to all of those places in the description. But it has been great. It's been nice to just go on off on one a bit. So I've really enjoyed it. So thank you.